Okay, so yeah, morning everyone. Thanks for joining us. We might get a couple more dropping in as we go, but given it's just past 10, we'll make a start. So yeah, welcome everyone to this webinar on work with your memory, not against it, which is exactly like it sounds. We've made it quite clear what we're talking about this morning. So I think everyone on the call knows me, and Wesley, you probably haven't met Kira, but you'll know everyone else, obviously. But yes, for those that don't know, Wesley and I are both part of BentoBot, which we'll talk about later on, um, as part of the as part of this webinar. Talk about the product that we've got that hopefully tackles this problem of memory loss when it comes to learning. But also we have a background in L&D more generally. So we're both part of People Unboxed, which is where a lot of people that are on this call, but also hopefully watching the recording will know us from. So we've got 50 years combined of as L&D experts. Wesley, I won't talk about how that splits that 50 years, but yeah, we've over that time we've partnered with lots of different clients in L&D. But what we've done for BentoBot is we've partnered with fantastic digital solutions company called Luminorth. So between People Unboxed L&D expertise and Luminorth's digital expertise, we've created BentoBot, which we promise you we're not going to spend too long talking about today. It's not a sales pitch, but we will touch a bit on it later. And what we actually want to spend our time on is talking to you about why traditional training typically fails and what actually works in professional development and the science behind how we can transform corporate learning. And it isn't just theory. These are real principles. There's lots of research that we're going to talk to you about, but also real principles that we've used in our own life experiences, both in personal life and in work life. So that's what we're going to be talking to you about today. Some basic housekeeping, as we've said, I believe you can turn your cameras on. You might not be able to. I think the settings do allow it. So feel free to turn on your cameras if you want to, but you don't have to. The lines are muted. We'll be using the chat function for any questions. I can see people are already in there, which is great. So please do ask questions. We're more than happy to take any questions. There are two of us, so whoever's not doing the talking, I'm sure can deal with the questions. And anything we can't deal with straight away, we'll come back to you later on with. Um, Hopefully safe space. It's just like any learning environment. It is that safe space to ask questions. If you're thinking it's someone else, probably is as well. And do challenge us. We want it to be a practical use of your time. So please do ask us questions. And if you're watching this on a recording, drop us a line afterwards if there's anything you want to ask as well. But get stuck in, have fun. We've got almost an hour together. So yeah, here we go. So Westy, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So, in terms of a very quick agenda, we're going to cover the problem. Tony's already alluded to it. The traditional way of learning, which is cram everything in. We're going to look at why that doesn't necessarily work, why cramming fails. And not just an opinion, we're going to look at the science behind that and discover a better way to learn. We're going to look at why timing matters, why it's important to spread the learning out over time. We'll come to that a bit later on. Then we're going to talk about the challenge. It's fine knowing all this stuff and understanding the science behind it. So why do we keep sticking to the old routine and keep working in the way we've always worked? We're going to look at that and try and introduce through applying the principles 5 key strategies that you can work through that will help you change the way you design learning to make it really stick. And as Tony said, we'll give you some time for some questions and answers towards the end, but do feel free to use the meeting chat. If there's any questions that pop up, pop them in there. If we don't answer them instantly, maybe it's because we know we're going to answer it later on in the session. But do feel free, anything that you need explaining, pop that in the chat and either myself or Tony will pick that up. So let's start at the beginning then. Let's talk about the problem as we see it. So the problem is this. How many of you have crammed for a certification, a product launch, a client presentation? It's not, we've all been there. It's not just students that do this. Professionals do it constantly too. We binge a training course the weekend before we need it. We cram for a AWS certification or leadership assessment or even to gain product knowledge. We cram everything in at the last second. Now, there's a couple of problems with this, not least that it gives us a false sense of confidence. We go in feeling prepared, versus actually being prepared. We haven't actually learned it. We could do it parrot fashion, but we're not really prepared to do it long term further down the line. So I guess that's fine for now. We've learned it for today, but what happens 6 weeks later when you actually need to use that skill again? Let's have a look at that. So here we are. We've trained, we've got this training day. We're confident, we're prepared, we're ready. We've learned everything we need to do maybe the night before. We've crammed it all in. But what happens 6 weeks later? Well, 6 weeks later, we can barely recall anything. And this is an uncomfortable truth, but I'm sure it's also one that most of you recognize. Now, the good news is this isn't a personal failing on you. It's not your fault. It's just how cramming works, or ironically, how cramming doesn't work. Our brains simply aren't designed for that level of information dump. Okay, we've never been wired that way. Let's have a look. Let me show you how it works and look at some of the science behind this stuff. Now, throughout this session, I love a good analogy, as anybody will know will tell you. Throughout this session, I want you to consider a core analogy that's going to run through a lot of what we're talking about here. Now, I'm no gardener, but imagine looking after a house plant. Cramming is dumping a bucket of water on that plant in one go. Okay, most of it's going to run off. It's going to make a bit of a mess, but some of it's going to be absorbed, but most of it's just going to run away. Now, for the first 2 or 3 days, I'm sure the plant will look fine, but really, the shallow roots won't sustain it over time. And that is the difference between cramming and a different way of doing it. This is exactly what happens in your brain when you try and cram information in. We're fine in the short term for the first few days. Yep, we've got that. But because it's not embedded, because we haven't, it's not deep rooted, we find it really hard to sustain and use that knowledge over time. So this isn't just my opinion or Tony's opinion. We don't make this stuff up. We've done a ton of research on this. So let's have a look at some of the research now and prove to you why there's got to be a better way. So Tony, if you jump to the next slide, please. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So the research is actually quite damning, and you can see that on the screen. This is knowledge retention, 27% using the traditional cramming method versus 82% using spaced repetition. We're going to introduce you to spaced repetition in a minute. Tony's going to take you through some of the theory behind it and explain how it works. It's not a marginal gain, right? So this is a threefold difference. So there's a threefold improvement by using spaced repetition versus cramming. And actually, cramming's even worse than that because cramming creates something called fluency illusion. So what that means is something feels familiar to us. And when something feels familiar, the brain mistakes that for mastery. So in my world, if I'm preparing to deliver a session, okay, I'll obviously look at a PowerPoint and I'll create a load of notes around that. Often I'll look at it and think, yeah, I know that bit, I know that bit. Because I've looked at it over and over again, I've seen the same slides, I just think I know it. That doesn't mean if I lost my notes on the way that I'd be able to deliver it. So my brain has already told me, oh, it's familiar, you know this, you've got mastery. That's not actually true. So we walk in confident, but that confidence can evaporate very quickly when we realize, oh, actually, I didn't really know it. I just had my notes in front of me. We were learning everything parrot fashion. So I've talked about how that might work in my role in L&D, but this applies to every corporate training program that front loads content. We chuck a load of stuff at people and assume that they're going to remember it weeks down the line when we need them to use it. Every leadership course that tries to teach everything that anybody's going to need in 2 days, or every onboarding program that dumps a load of information in the first week and expects people to know what to do and where to find their payslip 2 months down the line. Okay, it just does not work. Now, I found a better way, and we found a way that does actually work. And to explain to you why it works or how it works, I'm going to go away from the work setting now, and I'm going to take you through sort of a bit of a personal case of where I've seen this and where it's actually worked. So let me take you through a bit of a personal story. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but in November, I underwent some pretty major surgery. There's a long road of recovery ahead. Now, physical healing, half the battle. The mental challenge was getting back to myself. Okay. And to do that, I needed something to occupy my time. And I found a really unlikely partner in a four-string bass guitar. Now, I bought this guitar, got the amp, it all looks very pretty, but I had no idea where I was starting from. So I found an online course called Beginner to Badass. So maybe I'm a bass badass now, who knows? And here's what's fascinating though. As I was working through this course, I found that it was actually teaching me as much about how people learn as it was teaching me how to play my new guitar. So I'd actually tried to learn the bass when I was 16. So we had a bit of I'll call it a band at school, but there was a few mates who sort of, had a bit of a jam together. I gave that up within months. If there was no structure, no support, no one was teaching me how to use this thing, no one was telling me how to get better. There was just no structure. So what's different this time? Well, I haven't changed. The guitar hasn't changed, but this time there was proper learning design involved. 13 weeks later, and by the way, I chose 13 weeks. I could have done it quicker, but I thought, no, the recommended was spend more time learning this. Don't try and cram it all in. Ironically, what we're talking about. I think the shortest I could have done in was 8 weeks. Okay, I went for the middle, which was 13. There was also a 20-week plan. Same course, but just trying to cater for different people. By the end of 13 weeks, I was playing with confidence that I could never have expected. So what had changed? Well, my age had changed, maybe my ability hadn't changed though. The technology hadn't changed in terms of the guitar or anything. What changed was the learning architecture, how this course was actually designed and how it was taking me through it. Now, we'll talk about why it works so well as we go through this session, but the same principles of me learning the guitar apply to corporate skills, whether that be leadership, technical skills, product knowledge. If you could teach me to play bass guitar during recovery from major surgery, I'd argue we could pretty much teach anyone, anything with the right level of design. So let's take you through how it worked, why that course was so important, and also how we can apply that in the work environment. Now, as I've said, I tried to learn when I was 16. I wanted to learn the bass when I was 16. The problem wasn't motivational. The problem was that I didn't want to do it. I couldn't be bothered. I would have loved to be able to play the bass at 16. The problem's not motivational. The problem is neurological. So although cramming increases short-term memory retrieval, learning one song parrot fashion as an example, it actually reduces long-term memory encoding. So understanding why those notes work together would pay dividends further down the line when I was trying to learn another song, for example, but that's not the way it worked. So our brains are really good at prioritizing quick access over deep storage. I could learn one song parrot fashion when I was 16, but you know what? That's the only song I was ever able to play. And this actually creates what we call a negative feedback loop. And a negative feedback loop means the more you try and cram in, actually, the less you actually learn. So taking back to the base course, my base tutor let me practice for no more than 30 minutes a day. That was his absolute maximum I was allowed to do, 30 minutes. I usually spent about 15, sometimes 20, because obviously I was trying to recover. He explained that any more than that was a complete waste of my time as I wasn't learning anything new. His mantra was that I learn, I learn a skill, I learn how to play certain notes or certain chord, whatever it may be. And when I actually learn that is in my sleep between the sessions. Because so if you're really struggling with something, you need to take a break from it there. There is knowledge there. You just haven't got it all wired yet. Go away, have a rest, go to sleep, come back tomorrow. And all of a sudden I could kind of do it. It was a little bit easier. So this approach affects everything. Well, again, whether it be training programs, skill development, knowledge transfer, cramming is proven to not work. There's got to be a better way. So Tony, cramming doesn't work. What does? Well, Tony's going to take us through the science of how our brains work and actually how we want to learn. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Westy. So, yeah, as Westy said, imagine that water in that same plant that Westy mentioned earlier, but properly this time. So not the bucket approach, just enough. water at the right time at the right intervals so that the water penetrates deeply into those roots and encourages strong root growth. And that's going to be the thing that helps sustain the plant for years. Something I've never been that good at, if I'm honest. Um, but that's exactly how spaced repetition works with memory, right? So if we can do that same drip feed approach, then we can get that same sustained root growth and longer term retention. And why is that critical for learning design? Well, I'm sure everyone knows that whole same challenge that everyone has with learning, which is getting it actually to a return on investment. So getting people to apply that learning. And there's all sorts of stats on this, but the one we quite often refer to is the Harvard Business Review report that was called "Where Companies Go Wrong with L&D." And in there, they cite that only 12% of employees ever apply new skills learned in L&D programs. And right there, tells you everything you need to know. Money that's being thrown at training programs and interventions with only 12% ever being used. So much information being paid for and time being spent on that never comes to fruition. So that's the problem. And one of the biggest challenges around that, one of the biggest reasons is just that people forget. And I'm sure some of you will recognize what you're seeing on the screen here, this forgetting curve. But not everyone will probably know the background. So this is from Hermann Ebbinghaus, who was a German psychologist who led the way into investigations into memory back in 1885. So this has been around for a long time. So back then he developed this forgetting curve, and it shows that we forget things very quickly when we first learn them. So you can see there that drop off within a day down to 80% and then down to 60% in 3 days. You can see that forgetting curve there. And we can blame biology for this. Conserving energy has been essential for human survival because it allowed us to be more efficient in searching for food and shelter and competing for sexual partners, avoiding predators. So as a result of that conserving of energy, our brains quickly forget the things we don't use regularly. And you can see the numbers on here, but actually some modern studies go further. They now suggest that we forget up to 50% of new information within an hour of learning it and going up to 70% within 24 hours. So the reality is that, providing people with classroom or online courses can be an absolute waste of time and money unless we make a real effort to embed the knowledge. So we need to make that second nature as learning designers to make sure that we are getting the benefit from that time invested, both in the time invested in our design, but all the people that are attending that training. So um, Ebbinghaus took this a bit further. So he explored like what happens if we repeat things. So if we do another day, actually, if we repeat the content a day later, you can see that that curve starts to flatten out a bit. So we start forgetting a little bit more slowly, so we still forget, but not quite as quickly. And if we repeat again, that curve flattens out even more, and so on and so on. So you can see that over time, things start to be remembered for longer. And that is the whole basis for spaced repetition, repeating information at set intervals over time. And it allows us to overcome that forgetting curve, increases knowledge retention, and it's exercising those memory muscles until our brain sees it as important information. But you'll also see how those intervals are getting longer over time. So a day apart, then two, then three, and so on. So that is what we're trying to achieve is things getting more spaced out. We don't want to have to do everything every day, but actually, as we learn things, our memory helps us not do things all the time, but actually over spaced intervals. And that is really critical. And we'll come back to that later. But essentially, we want to repeat things just before we forget them, not too early, not too late, and we'll come back to that later. And by doing this, it helps us retain it. Just like riding a bike, right? I haven't ridden a bike for years, but practiced so much when I was younger. That's been spaced out over years. I can still do it perfectly fine. So that's the principle behind it. Now, that was back in the 19th century, and there's been so much more research since. But I want to introduce you to this one. This is the Leitner system, back from still a while ago, 1972. And this Leitner is kind of came up with this spaced repetition technique using flashcards, where he was essentially testing his knowledge on these flashcards and then sorting the flashcards into boxes based on how well the material was known. So they all start in box one. If he got them right, he moved them up a box and gradually they would move back to box five. If he got them wrong, they moved down a box and back towards the front again. And those were tested more or less frequently. So essentially, the things you don't know get tested or practiced more often. The things you do know is less frequently, and that's the whole principle really behind this spaced repetition. It kind of turned it into a bit of a game here, where you're trying to get a bit of a chain of answers, so it moves further and further down those boxes. And although this principle has been adapted slightly since, it is the key principle still underpinning spaced repetition. And what it does is it helps personalize the approach, because it focuses our attention on our own specific knowledge gaps just at the right time. But thankfully, without the cardboard boxes anymore. So I said I'd come back to the timing element. So when you first learn something, your brain creates these fragile neural connections, and without reinforcing that decays really quickly. So every time you successfully recall information, just as you're about to forget it, your brain strengthens those neural pathways. And the optimal timing isn't random. So if we review too soon, we're wasting time on stuff we already know. It doesn't help us at all. If we review too late, then we have to relearn from scratch. So there's that sweet spot in the middle, where we're just about to forget. And this is where we create the maximum strengthening of that neural pathway. And quite often progress happens in the background, even though you don't even recognize it's happening. You don't feel it day to day. A bit like Westy with his bass guitar there. He was learning bits that he didn't really realize how much progress he's making until all of a sudden he could play a part of the song or the whole song. And that is also true with what our BentoBot learners tell us. They see it as, oh, it was fun. It was short. It was bite sized. They were just these fun quizzes. Didn't realize I was learning till I got to the end and passed the test really easily because I'd remembered everything. People don't feel like they're learning, but they are. So it's that fun element of it. I related to my Duolingo experience. If anyone's ever learned a language on Duolingo, same principle. They use spaced repetition as well, and I really enjoy. On my 730-day streak on Norwegian now, so doing pretty well with that. So I gave you a couple of studies there from the 19th century and 1972. But this research is going on all the time, and the latest research continues to validate that approach. So, in a 2025 study of over 26,000 physicians, spaced repetition was found to be significantly superior for learning and knowledge transfer. And double-spaced repetitions outperformed cramming particularly well. So, double-spaced repetitions, otherwise known as expanding rehearsal, is a learning technique where the interval between the review sessions doubles over time. So 1 day, then 2 days, then 4 days, then 8 days, and so on. And that method maximizes the long-term retention because it forces the brain to work harder to recall the information over time, and that strengthens those neural pathways and combats the forgetting curve that we just looked at. There was also another study with a French university where students found spaced repetition made the students twice as likely to succeed in entrance exams. And there's a whole load of different research out there. We've got a couple on the screen there, but we can share more with you afterwards. There's lots and lots that backs this up. Went the wrong way. So the science is clear and it's consistent. And as Wesley said earlier, they're not marginal improvements. They're often 200 to 300% better retention. So we're seeing real significant and consistent data here. But we all know things that work, yet we still don't do them. I know that I should eat better and go running more often. But last night I got home quite late, ordered a takeaway and sat on the sofa for the evening. And sadly enough, that is an absolutely true story. In the L&D world, what does that look like? Well, it's leadership development programs being completed but never applied. It's technical skills being learned and never practiced. It's one-hit product knowledge that fades within days. And the thing is, often pressure or time gets in the way. So, like with my takeaway last night, time got in my way, and I just sacrificed what I know I should be doing. And with all the things on our to-do list as L&D leaders, it's the same thing. Time pressure stops us doing what we know to be the right thing. Or ironically, like I believe we sometimes just forget to do the right thing. Like we're talking about forgetting. Actually, if we don't do this all the time, we forget to build programs that embed. So the more we do it, the more we design learning interventions or programs in a way that embeds, then the more regularly we'll start to embrace doing the right things in our learning design, and the more it will stick in our mind to design things for the long term. Because knowledge isn't the problem, sustained behavior change is the problem, and that's what we should be addressing with our learning design. So look, here's how to do it at a really high level. And don't worry, we will get into more detail later because this is very high level. Um, but essentially, we are, creating some material. We are considering what is the optimum length for it, rather than let's fit everything in there. We're reviewing it at the right moment, which helps our neural pathways to strengthen, and then we're expanding the repetition intervals over time. That's essentially what we're looking to do. And like I say, later on we will take you through a few bits. We've got our BentoBot platform, which of course we'll talk about a bit towards the end, because we've had such impressive results using this principle through BentoBot. But also we're going to talk to you about how you can bring it to life in a classroom environment as well. But this change, moving away from traditional learning, not always easy. Nobody likes change. So if we're asking our learners to change the way that they've been told learning works for so long, i.e., not just sitting down for 2 hours and completing a traditional e-learning module, but instead making learning a part of their daily routine, we need to give them some motivation. So, Westy, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So how can we motivate people to complete training? And now studies confirm things like digital badging and rewards enhance what we call intrinsic motivation, while actually some of those things actually have minimal impact on extrinsic motivation. You've got a difference in the two motivations there on the screen. In other words, the key to getting people doing this stuff, the key to actually doing it rather than just knowing it's the right thing to do, is getting people to do learning because they want to, not because they've been told they have to. And if we keep that in our heads, that's an absolute game changer for learning design. So I know I keep referencing it because it really resonated with me. In my base course, there was specific joy in playing a real song from day one. Okay, not weeks of dry theory, not here's how we're going to learn these scales and here's going to teach you how to read music and all of this stuff, which is all really important. But right now, I want to actually start playing a song because I want to enjoy this, and then I want to learn another one, and I want to learn not some classical song from years ago. I want to learn something that I actually know and a song that people recognize. The theory was baked into the practice that I was doing. So, along with completing sessions, I was also ticking off progress. I was earning badges when I completed a section. You've earned a badge for completing your first song. You've now done, there was all manner of this ticking things off. Those little wins is what kept me coming back. I felt progress. I could hear progress. And actually, I wanted to learn. I wanted to come and do the next thing tomorrow. And the learning was relevant too. So I learnt a scale because I needed that scale for a song right now. There was bits that I learnt, and I hadn't even realised that I was learning how to do walk ups or walk downs, but I needed it for that song. And then a week down the line, I was told, "Oh, you've been doing that for the last 2 weeks. We just haven't labelled it yet." The same is true for corporate learning. Teach leadership concepts through real scenarios that we're facing today. Okay, so if we want people to do learning because they want to do it, well, let's think of things that are actually going to help them do their jobs easier, make their lives easier. Teach product knowledge through actual client situations. Don't just teach a dry model. With this approach, learners see the benefit in doing the training, how it solves problems, how it makes their life easier. So sustainable motivation comes from within. Sure, we need little wins to help us move forward, whether that be, I don't know, Tony alluded to going running. Well, if Tony's long-term plan is to run a marathon, he's not going to go out tomorrow, put on his trainers and run a marathon. So maybe he closes the rings on his watch, and those little wins along the way will keep him going towards that end goal. How do we do that in something like BentoBot? We use gamification. We use gamification to help those little wins, whether that be digital badging, whether it be high score tables, as long as it's done right. And there's a load of research around how this level of gamification can work. Tony, if we can look at that. Oh, you're already there. Sorry, mate. So the key bit is gamification works. However, not all gamification is created equally. So there's recent study in 24 and going into 2025 even that showed that well-designed gamification significantly increases motivation when it comes to learning. It's exactly how Duolingo works amongst a wealth of other things. It keeps us coming back. Now, the key word here is well-designed. Because the flip side of it is heavy-handed competitive elements are actually counterproductive and turn people off of wanting to do learning. They can create anxiety and stress, and that actually hampers people saying, well, I don't like this. I don't feel that I want to continue with this. So what is light gamification? And light gamification is things like progress tracking, achievement badges, streak rewards, ironically, again, everything that was involved in the base course. But they're all focused on personal growth and measuring personal growth and showing you how much you've learned versus competing against other people. Okay. It's about you being better than you were yesterday, not you being better than someone else. And that's what keeps coming you back, it keeps you coming back day after day. So I think just as a reminder, we've covered why cramming fails. Tony's taken you through how spaced repetition works. And I've just explained why it's important to keep people motivated. And that can be through very simple, small wins. But people need to know that they're making progress and they need to know that they're learning as they go. So, a lot of theory. I think is about time we start looking at how that might work in practice. I'm going to hand back to you, Tony.
Thank you. Yeah, so and again, a lot of this stuff isn't rocket science, but it's about bringing it all together. So most people probably know some of the elements we've talked about today, and maybe they know all of it, but not many people are really doing it all and considering how they apply it in their interventions and their programs. So let's look at how you might apply the science in your organization. So these are the five principles that we recommend you think about that, and they work whether you're designing classroom training, e-learning, blended programs, whatever it is. The key is really to understand the principle and then proactively consider each one when you design a learning intervention or program or whatever it is you're designing that you want to see behavioral change in. So you can see there scientifically optimized intervals. Obviously, we've talked about the importance of spaced repetition and having those correct intervals so that we're tackling things just as we're about to forget them. Bite-sized learning, so breaking things into small chunks, not trying to do everything in one big go, which our brains can't handle. That's that bucket dumping the water on everything. Engaging without overwhelming, that's that bit of fun, whether that's gamification, some sort of engagement level, but without putting too much pressure and anxiety on people. Multimodal delivery, so making sure we're using the right platform for things, which we'll touch on. And then ultimately making sure that everything we design is focused on that knowledge that sticks principle. So the first one of those, scientifically optimized intervals, we've talked about the theory of it. What does it look like? Well, actually, when we've delivered a classroom session, that it doesn't stop there, and that's one of the problems straight away is that a lot of the time it does. It thinks my job's done, tick, off I go. Actually, it's about the follow-up piece. So having follow-up sessions might be the next day, the next week, the next month, and that could be a follow-up group session. It could be one-to-one coaching or just a one-to-one follow-up training session, but something that revisits and supports the repetition that we know is going to strengthen those neural pathways. In digital, it might be automated spacing through LMS or using spaced repetition tools like BentoBot that's going to do all the work for you. Now, of course, it doesn't have to be. You could do it manually. You could schedule things manually in your LMS. It would work just as well. But obviously, there are tools that can do that for you. And in a blended environment, it's obviously a combination of both. So how can you have those gaps where you've got some classroom, some digital at those different intervals that's going to make it really embedded. So typically that would be a workshop and then using the digital platforms to reinforce that learning and make it stick. So bite-sized pieces that reinforce it. And that's again exactly how we use BentoBot. Sometimes it's to train and embed, sometimes it's to embed classroom workshops. The key thing here though is the principle matters more than the technology. So it's about making sure that even if you do it all manually, actually, how are you making sure that you're considering those repetition intervals rather than the one hit wonder when it comes to your program designs? Second one, bite-sized learning. So try and get those shorter workshops rather than these marathon events. And that goes for digital as well, obviously. So, can you have 5-10 minute micro learning and videos, or or very short e-learning modules at the very longest? So rather than sit down, do an hour's e-learning where we know someone's just going to click next as quickly as they can, and even if they don't, even if they try to remember everything, they just haven't got a chance anyway because our brains don't work that way. And just like with a plant, again, the water's going to run off and only some of it's going to be retained. And in a blended environment, obviously, we're trying to build in both of those and really embrace the variety. Variety is another thing that helps learning stick. So the more we can have variety in the way we deliver things, but also the content itself and the different types of interactions, that all helps the training to stick and be embedded. And look, I appreciate that some of this isn't always possible. Logistically, it's not always easy to bring people together for, I don't know, an hour 10 times in a month rather than let's bring them all in for one day and deliver a training workshop. Because getting people together in a room is not always easy in an organization, especially when they're across, the whole of the UK or even further apart. So appreciate sometimes that's not going to be possible, but it's being considerate about when can you do that. And if you have to do those longer sessions, how can you break it up so that even the session itself is in smaller chunks? It's not too content heavy. You're having plenty of breaks. It's really trying to pick your battles and really shorten things where you can. Third one, engaging without overwhelming, as Westy just talked about, some of the things you can do. So if in a classroom environment, having skill checklists. So getting people to reflect, like mini self-assessments that get them to reflect on where they are now or where they've got to. Quizzes that embed the knowledge, like little just fun quizzes that we quite often use Kahoot in a classroom because it's a fun way of doing a quick knowledge check or a recap. Certificates, recognizing people, that personal growth progress that Westy was talking about earlier, and just regular reflections in the classroom. In digital, it might be progress bars that show them you are making progress, personal growth again, badges to reward that, streaks to keep you engaged and wanting to come back and do more, and dashboards to support. And you might have leaderboards and things, and that's fine. Look, it's just not being too competitive because it is about personal growth. As I've said, it's more of personal growth than competition is the aim. Fourth is multimodal delivery. So we want to try and have this nice blend. As I said, variety helps anyway, but learning shouldn't be one size fits all. So how can we mix things up? So when you're designing your programs, your interventions, how can you mix things up? So having some classroom elements where you are tackling the difficult concepts, you're practicing scenarios, you're having deeper conversations in the classroom, but using digital elements for reinforcing those ideas or doing self-assessments and spacing out some of that content repeat. And then, of course, we have to deliver on the 20% and the 70% of our blended plan as well. So that's that peer-to-peer learning to consolidate and our on-the-job real application. Of course, we would always factor that in. So our blended approach is still going to be a crucial part of embedding. And then I guess this is probably more of an overarching one, and just really designing for knowledge that sticks. And if all you did is every time you design a program thought why, what, who, when, and where, you wouldn't be going too far wrong. So start with the why. What are you trying to achieve here? What's the the change in behavior you want to see. And don't forget, behavioral change won't come with one hit, which is what we're talking about here. It's about sustained change. So what are you trying to achieve? What's the why? But change the way you think about that. Measure your success differently. So not did they complete the course, not did they fill in a happy sheet afterwards and say they enjoyed it, not can they pass at just a test at the end of the day, but are they applying it 6 months later? Do they still have that knowledge in a year? You know, start thinking about how you measure success of any training differently. The what? Be really targeted. Don't overload. There's a real tendency to try and put everything you want people to know in one session, and we face it quite often, and we openly challenge a lot of our clients with this and say, look, we'd rather do a few things really well than lots of things badly. You know, it's a very common phrase we use because the tendency is to say, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if? Wouldn't it be great if we could do this, and this?" But actually, all we're doing is overloading. And as we've said, the brains can't handle that. And what they'll do is they'll only remember a couple of bits of that because we know they're going to forget 70% of it or whatever within 24 hours. And I keep saying to people, if you teach someone 10 things and they only remember three of them, it's up to them which three they remember. And it might not be the three things you want them to remember. So pick the three things that you really want them to remember. So, be really targeted. What's the things you really want them to know, and don't overload them. Who? Relevance. Context is really critical. Wesley talked about that with his song. So abstract theory fades really quickly, but learning that's grounded in real situations is what connects directly to behavior. And that's the thing that people helps that people remember, the things that help them to solve the problems they actually face. So really think about how you can tailor it and make it relevant to their role when you're writing a scenario or creating content. And the other part of the who to consider is managers. Managers play a absolutely critical role in whether or not that learning sticks or disappears. So think about how you create learning programs and interventions that embrace manager buy-in. So whether that's arranging pre-program manager kickoff calls or whether it's encouraging your learners to go directly to their managers, don't lose sight of that important part of it. They have a huge role. When you as a trainer have gone and you're not around for the next day, the next week, and the line managers are the people you're relying on to really help them embed that. That's a key part to build into any design. When, of course, we want you to think about the reinforcement intervals. Even if all you're doing is classroom, think about what can I do? What can I do to reinforce this tomorrow, in a week, in a month? Think about what is it you can do. It might be just you're going to send them a little video in a week. It could be anything that just triggers that reminder and keeps it front of mind and keeps reinforcing the learning. Just plan for these spaced intervals to keep that learning to stick. And then where, of course, think about using different platforms. So whether that's Classroom, a learning app, whatever it might be, what are the different platforms you can use to create the variety, but also because each tool, each platform, each system has its own strength. Classroom has its place, digital has its place. It's about knowing where you want to use each one. So really think about those 5 Ws when it comes to designing your program. And what about where it can be applied? Well, the truth is anything, because it's a learning principle. It's not targeted at a certain area. So, it can help with leadership development. Of course, it's going to help factual things like product training and things like that. But actually, leadership development, a lot of the time people come on a course, they learn a leadership principle, and if they don't use it the next day, which, let's be honest, it's very rare that will happen, actually they start to forget it straight away. So having reinforcement with digital platforms can help remind them of the principle until they use it, and until it sticks, so that it becomes just deep rooted, as we said with our plant analogy. Compliance, absolutely. We could think about compliance, the amount of compliance modules that you have to do every year. Wouldn't it be better if it was an always on and people just always knew it? So it's not a big refresh every year. It could be bite sized so it sticks in people's minds throughout. Sales enablement with ongoing practice. Onboarding, one of the biggest ones. Westy talked about it earlier. Onboarding, one of the most stressful times for people, where you throw the most new information at them ever, and then you expect them to remember it all. Here's 10 e-learning modules you have to do before you start, and here's a whole new way of working for you. Actually, why can't you space it out over the first 90 days with them, so that they can learn it in a way that's going to stick and it's actually useful. Otherwise, we're just pouring so much water on them, it's just all going to drain off. It's a complete waste of everyone's time and money. Product training, products changing all the time. This is a nice way of in sort of building confidence in selling those products, but also updating people when products change. We find BentoBot being used a lot for that because it's new launches. It's a nice way of sharing that information and helping it stick with people. And then technical training, of course, in a similar way. So, Westy, back over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So before we a bit of a summary, let's just zoom out a little bit for a moment and take a breath. We've covered an awful lot of theory there. Our brains have evolved over millions of years to learn in a specific way. Okay, cramming actually works against those natural patterns. It's forcing information in when your brain just isn't ready to hold it. Space repetition is the opposite. Space repetition works with your brain's natural rhythms. It strengthens memories at exactly the right moments. And I guess, in summary, for me, it's the difference between swimming against a current or flowing with it. Why are we fighting our brains and trying to get it to do something it's just not designed to do? Remember, when you're designing these programs, Tony's just taking you through 5 steps there, but consistency and pacing beats intensity every single time when it comes to learning something. Progress is often happening in the background, even when you don't feel it day to day. You're chipping away, you are learning, your people are taking this stuff in. So I guess the choice is yours now. What do you do with the new information we've just given you? They're not just interesting principles. They're not Tony and I's, we thought we'd share our thoughts on this with you. They're decisions you can make starting tomorrow. The choice is literally yours, what you do with this information. You can keep dumping all of the water on at once. That, with those intensive workshops with no follow-up, and you keep your fingers crossed that, the plant's going to stay alive. Or you can start cultivating those deep roots through the space reinforced learning that we've told you about today. What brought you here today won't take you where you want to go. I mean, some of it's going to be down to you. So whether you use classroom training, digital tools, or a combination of both, whether you build it yourself or you use existing solutions, the science is the same. Real learning happens not in the moment of struggle when the pressure's on and you've got to learn something. The real learning happens in that quiet recognition of progress being made and realizing I've moved from here to here and look how much more I know now. That's why I want to keep learning. So now there's a lot of theory there. And, although this webinar is absolutely not designed to be a BentoBot sales pitch, if you've stayed this long, I count you as a bit of a captive audience. So we'd be daft not to show you how BentoBot is designed specifically to embrace some of the theories we've told you about today. So first up, Tony's talked a couple of times about timing. It's all about little and often. So what you're looking at on the screen there, this is the admin backend of one of the courses within BentoBot. So each of those little pink blocks you can see there is a piece of training. That could be a video, an article, a 3D Explorer, a sorting activity, whatever it may be. What it is doesn't matter. The key here is each one of those pieces of content is no longer than 3 to 5 minutes a day, because we know that's how long people have got, and we want to be able to drip feed that in. Then we've got the workouts. So those are the yellow blocks you can see on the right-hand side there. And this is where the space repetition really identifies what the individual knowledge gaps of each person are. So let me explain that for a second. This is where the space repetition really kicks in. So if we've all done the same training for days 1 through to 4, we're all human, right? We've all remembered slightly different things. This is why BentoBot starts to question, okay, but what have you actually remembered? Because, going back to the science we've already covered with you, it's absolute madness to keep cramming in more stuff when we haven't actually remembered what we've taught you on days 1 through to 4. So what BentoBot does here is it starts to identify individual knowledge gaps. Tony's remembered certain things. I've remembered certain things. Chris in the chat there has remembered other things. And it starts to tailor the course accordingly going forward and helping you. Just as you're about to forget things, it'll remind you again, all building up to sort of that end of level quiz if you want to look at it in that way. So that's how we use timing in Bento. We've also got sort of this light gamification that we talked about. So if you look at the example on the screen there, the phone, this is the user front end now. This is how light gamification that we mentioned works. You've got coins there, coins that I can use to buy a new hat for my avatar, for example, or even to purchase real rewards. So we've got the ability in BentoBot for people to be able to buy vouchers, for example. My streaks are there, which keeps me coming back, but also at the same time respecting my days off. I don't want to lose my days off. I lose my streak because I'm off at the weekend. So BentoBot respects that and works around different people's schedules. We've got a leaderboard in there now. Leaderboards, we talked about anxiety and stress. If you're top of the leaderboard or you're bottom of the leaderboard, you know what? You're either very happy or you're very stressed. So leaderboards are a bit divisive. So we use a leaderboard in Bento, but we use a leaderboard in Bento that resets on a monthly basis because it's a tool. It does motivate people, but it also needs to be something that's motivational and not something that can be used as a stick. Okay, so a new starter, for example, would never catch up if we didn't reset the leaderboard. So it resets every month. People are like, okay, cool. Well, I better try and get myself back up that leaderboard again. So it's them working against themselves, really, rather than feeling under the pressure of needing to be top or, more importantly, not wanting to be bottom. And also there, we've got my personal sort of look how far I've come section. I mentioned this with the base course where I'd get I could see an overview of what pieces of the course I've already completed and what was coming next. I could jump back in and review something if I wanted to. That's exactly what the Learner Passport in BentoBot does. It shows my progress through the course, but it's also a nice way for me to be able to review any commitments I make when I've completed a course. So I can go back and think, okay, well, when I did situational leadership course, what commitments did I make? Have I actually done those? And then go back and remind myself if I need to. So that's how we bring the light gamification in. And then finally, we need to understand it's working. Okay, so we have a reports dashboard. Again, this is an admin view that shows progress for each learner. How long people have spent on training, what courses are they doing, how far are they through this course? But it also highlights sections of the learning that maybe everyone's struggling with. So do we need to clarify a process? It's the question we're asking too ambiguous maybe. So if everyone's struggling with the same question at the same time, well, that's a bit of a flag for the L&D team themselves to go back and say, we need to actually look at the learning. So maybe we're not making this stick. So BentoBot isn't just great for learners, it's also loved by the L&D teams who work with it as well, because they've got all of the reporting they need, but it's also making their content better over time. So we've covered a lot of stuff. The science is clear, the approach works, and the results, they're not an opinion, the results literally speak for themselves. So what's next? The good news is you don't need to overhaul everything overnight. Okay, so my advice would be start small. Pick one training program, but add in spaced follow-ups for that program. And what does that look like? Well, if you to get you started, that could even be just emails. So, someone's come on a course and then we send a period, a few emails spaced out over the next sort of 10 days going, oh, as a reminder of this. People just need to be reminded of what they've learned. So you can even do it in that way to get you started. But the key here is to then measure their knowledge retention at 1 month versus your usual approach. I'll pause there because your usual approach might be, well, we never go back and check if they've actually remembered anything because in reality, lots of people don't. So let's start small and let's do that and see if that has had an impact. Explore the tools. So your LMS may already have spaced repetition features. Maybe there is a way of you to be able to spread that learning out over time. If not, there are dedicated tools. Obviously, I'm going to suggest BentoBot. That will help you automate the whole process. But remember, going back to what Tony said, the technology that you're using doesn't really matter. What matters is the principle of doing it, of building in that repetition, building in that motivation to help the learning stick. And obviously, we're here to help. So Following the webinar, you'll get some resources sent out to you in a follow-up email. If we don't send it out fairly soon, you're going to start forgetting. We all know that because you were listening earlier. So we're happy to discuss, though, your specific context. Where does this fit for you? How does it work with what you're trying to do? Whether that be classroom or digital approaches, we're happy to have that conversation for both. The key thing, though, is to start. Try it with one program and see the difference. The principles are there, the science backs it up. It's really worth a go. Now, we've got about 2 minutes, so Tony and I would love to hear any questions you may have. So feel free to pop those in the chat for us, and we'll answer anything that you have.
And just while we're waiting for any questions, you can see on the screen there, if you want to chat to us about BentoBot, drop us a line, or you can visit us at www.bentobot.com. And you can get a free demo from there and see the costs and everything. We're very transparent on everything and the way it works and our course library and everything else. So yeah, we're happy to do a full demo and anything for anyone that's interested. A question from Rachel. Any suggestions for how to integrate this when there's already established training processes in place that we aren't in a position to replace yet? Yeah. So and that is the case for a lot of people where we've got this legacy training in place, which are all 45-minute e-learning modules, and we don't want. It's very costly and time consuming to move over. Well, actually, BentoBot allows you to do a staggered approach. So we can upload SCORM files into BentoBot, and we did this purely for this reason because we don't want huge e-learning modules in BentoBot. It's designed to help people support a transition. So you can upload SCORM files. You can then break it down into small pieces over time, so you can convert a course one at a time. That's the idea of that. But we can show you that more on a call if you need. Specific examples of success you've had, industries in particular. There's a couple that jump to mind. Red training is one of the ones, and I'm sure Kim, who will be watching this recording, I'm sure. Kim is one of our biggest fans from Red, and she will happily tell you, I'm sure, all about it. But they're using it to really get their construction teams bought into training. They don't have much time available, and that's their biggest pain point. They're on the go all the time, so it's very easy for them to use. Actually, one of my favorite ones is when we worked with Dr. Martins on space repetition, and they were trying to challenge a certain area of their sales, some product training, and they ran a pilot to around the accessories, and it landed so well that they ran out of stock in the local area because everyone became so much more confident in selling. So that was a fun fact that we enjoyed. And then Kira, I'd like to know a little bit more about how gamification is being received by adults. You referenced light touch, but any further insights given lots of experiences? Yeah, funny enough, because it is so light touch, Kira, when we very first launched this, we were actually a little bit worried about it, being really honest. And so we really carefully tracked engagement at age groups in the original in the early days. And we found a slightly higher engagement level in older generations, the younger. So it was, and this was, we did a test where there was no pushing, there was no email reminders, no forced mandatory learning or anything like that, and the engagement was 86%. I think it was above. I can't remember the age groups actually, but 86% in the older groups and 84 in the younger groups. So actually, really high engagement considering there was no mandatory learning and no pushing in both groups, but higher in the older, and the feedback was strong as well. I think it's because it's almost like, although they might not be as, I don't want to speak for everyone here, but not as comfortable with all tech and gamification. Actually, because it is really basic and really straightforward and simple and fun, it's a way for them to get involved as well. So, yeah, it's really worked well with all
The
age
other
groups.
thing I'll add to that is that the non-competitive nature of it really helps
Yeah,
for that age group. So people don't want to be put under pressure to, you need to beat this person. It's not like that. They're almost working against themselves. It's a bit like playing golf. I could play against a professional, but actually we're both playing within our sort of handicap. So what we were seeing there was because people weren't being forced to do it, and it was actually motivational because they didn't have to say, I know this or I don't. So without going too far into it, Kira, the way the workouts work and the way you gain coins and the way you gain your streak is for doing learning. It's not
Yeah,
for being brilliant at everything, and that's absolutely critical for the way BentoBot works. We want people to come back and do something every day. We
yeah,
don't want them to be perfect at it. And that's where that light touch gamification really works. We're rewarding people doing training. We're not rewarding someone saying, I got 100% in a quiz. And
yeah.
that's when it does become
Rewarding, rewarding the right behaviors. You're right. Yeah, that
correct.
daily learning we said about. Yeah, good. Chris, BentoBot being on a phone. You're right. So it's a web app, not a native app, so it can work on any device. So it is as simple as a URL that we can put into any system that you've currently got, and launch from anywhere. So from any existing LMS, any existing intranet, anything like that. And then someone would see their own learner dashboard once they get in there. But we have lots of clients using it on laptops and PCs as much as phones. Although it's designed primarily for phone because we know most people prefer to use it that way because it is bite size and they'd like to use it on the go. But yep, can use on any device.
It's a great question, Chris. And just backing up what Tony's just said there, BentoBot is not designed to chuck out your existing LMS and bring BentoBot in. It can absolutely work with an existing LMS. So, if you've got an established LMS and you've got a load of training on there, but a bit that's missing is the bit we've told you is really useful, which is all about spaced repetition and embedding. Well, you can do both. So you can keep the system you've already got, and then Bento takes over to help you just embed the learning that you've got. So it's not designed to replace the LMS you've got, it's designed to work alongside with it. Does someone need to be
I
included in
need
the
to.
leaderboard or
No,
something like
we can
that?
turn the leaderboard off and we can also take people out of the leaderboard. Yeah, so
No.
that's a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Any final questions? Okay, well, look, thank you very much for joining. Appreciate you joining or watching the recording. As I said, if you want to get in touch, you can see on the screen where to contact us. And good luck with applying the principles into your design, whatever you do, whether you contact us or not. And we hope you help challenge the way learning is being created and designed for the long-term embedding. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.